Turn your Bibles to Revelation chapter 14, and we will read verse 8. Revelation 14, verse 8. The 14th chapter has to do with the Lamb that appears on Mount Zion, and there's all kinds of activity that happen when this takes place. Last week we read about the angel with the everlasting gospel. And tonight, verse 8 says, "And another angel followed, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication." Boy, that certainly is an inspiring message for Christmas time, isn't it? Well, the second angel pictured in this verse immediately follows the first angel who brought the message of the everlasting gospel. The importance of this fact is that the preaching of the everlasting gospel exposes a condition called Babylon. This Babylon exists in the man-made churches originating with both the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth of chapter 13. Up to the time that the Lamb appears on Mount Zion, the great majority of believers were confined to such churches. This Babylon condition is a spiritual conspiracy designed and motivated by the great red dragon of chapter 12, using the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth to keep God's people from following the Lamb wherever he goes. The church, as built by Jesus Christ, has two phases. It has, first of all, a spiritual phase, and second, a material phase. The spiritual phase is the actual experience of salvation in which people are born of the Spirit of God and baptized by that same Spirit into the body of Christ, as the Apostle Paul taught us in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. The church also has a material phase, in that born-again Christians come together in congregations to worship God, to fellowship with each other, and to spread the gospel to the lost. So if you are saved, you are part of the church that Jesus built spiritually. And as we gather together, we endeavor to be just the people that are the church that Jesus built and nothing else. Well, this Babylon also has two phases. First of all, it is motivated by a spirit of unbelief and rebellion against the true gospel of Christ. And then it is organized into various denominations, churches, organizations, groups, and even independent congregations. Because both the church built by Jesus and this Babylon have two phases, that means there are four possible personal conditions that can exist among professing Christians. First, a person can be in the church built by Jesus both spiritually and materially. By this is meant that a person can be saved from sin and living a holy life, that's the spiritual condition, and physically worshiping in a congregation that is nothing more than what Jesus has built as part of his church. Second, a person can be in the church built by Jesus spiritually and materially be in a church that is part of Babylon. This means that it is possible for a person to be saved from sin and living a holy life, the spiritual condition, and then physically worshiping in a church that is part of the beast of the sea or the beast of the earth. Third, a person can be in Babylon spiritually and also in the church Jesus built materially. That sounds a little complicated, but think with me. A person can be religious with a false testimony of salvation and not living a holy life, rebelling against God's claim against his life, and then physically attending a congregation that is actually part of the church Jesus built. If we are that kind of a congregation and there's somebody with a false testimony of salvation. That's the condition that we're describing there. And then fourth, a person can be in Babylon both spiritually and materially. That means he can have a false testimony of salvation, not living a holy life, and then be part of a church that is part of the beast of the sea or the beast of the earth. So 4 possible conditions that any person could be in. So the possibility of the biblical church in its spiritual sense and its material sense is restored with the appearance of the Lamb on Mount Zion in chapter 14. This appears as a host of people identified as the 144,000 following the Lamb wherever he goes. With the crowd following the Lamb, the first angel appears preaching the everlasting gospel. Then, as others of God's people hear this everlasting gospel, it becomes necessary for a second angel to come with a very important message for them to hear, understand, and obey. And this message is that Babylon is fallen. Okay? That is our introduction. Let's examine Babylon. The biblical and historic Babylons reveal the very nature of this Babylon in the 14th chapter of Revelation. Let's give some background from some commentators. Albert Barnes gives us an introduction to Babylon in his commentary. He wrote, Babylon was a well-known city on the Euphrates. Anybody ever have ancient history when you were in high school? Nobody? Oh, one person did? Okay. Well, you remember studying there was a Babylon, right? And that's what Barnes is saying. A well-known city on the Euphrates, and was in the days of its pride and glory the head of the heathen world. In reference to the meaning of the word in this place, it may be remarked, number 1, that the general characteristics of Babylon were that it was proud, haughty, insolent, oppressive. It was chiefly known and remembered by the Hebrew people as a power that had invaded the Holy Land, that had reduced its capital and its temple to ruins, that had destroyed the independence of their country, subjecting it to the condition of a province, and that had carried away the inhabitants into a long and painful captivity. It became, therefore, the emblem of all that was haughty and oppressive, and especially of all that persecuted the church of God. And 2, the word must be used here in the book of Revelation to denote some power that resembled the ancient and literal Babylon in these characteristics. So what's mentioned in Revelation has to look somewhat like the ancient empire of Babylon. He goes on and says that the literal Babylon was no more, but the name might be properly used to denote a similar power. So we're getting an idea that the Babylon mentioned here in Revelation 14 is similar in some way to the ancient empire of Babylon. The literal Babylon was proud, haughty, insolent, and oppressive. It was an empire that had been the head of the heathen world at its time in history. The Babylonian Empire was the instrument God used to bring judgment on the apostasy of the Israelites, removing them from their homeland and holding them captive for 70 years. Barnes concluded that the Babylon of Revelation 14 is the emblem of all that was haughty and oppressive, and especially of all that persecuted the church of God. Hence, its appearance in the book of Revelation. The first mention of Babylon in the Bible under the name of Babel is found in Genesis chapter 10, verses 8 through 12. That reads this way: Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, that is the principal city. So Nimrod came up in the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, Shinar, founded his city Babylon there and other cities, and then moved west toward the Mediterranean Sea to Assyria. Okay? This was the beginning of the very first empire in history. Nimrod is the leading player in this narrative, so it stands to reason there is something about the character of this man that defines the character of his empire. Dr. H.C. Leupold, in his book Exposition of Genesis, distills the quality of his character in these words. So this inciter to revolt came to be the first tyrant upon the earth, oppressing others and using them for the furtherance of his own interests. He says he was a rebel because he resisted authority, and he was a tyrant because he was an oppressive and cruel ruler over people. This Nimrod resisted the authority of God to such a degree that it became his slogan, a mighty hunter before God. And that's really what that means. Nothing about hunting deer and elk and things like that. A mighty hunter before God. He hunted people with the intent to take them away from God and make them slaves in his own kingdom of Babel. So he used his army to bring others under bondage to himself, and he used his army to increase his kingdom. About his kingdom, Leupold writes this: here is the real story of the founding of empires, for that matter, of the first empires. Having the type of character that we find described in verses 8 and 9 in the person of Nimrod, we must needs regard both Babylon and Assyria as exponents of the spirit of this world. This attitude over against Babylon is the attitude of the Scriptures in prophetic utterances as well as in the book of Revelation. These early kingdoms or empires are, therefore, not to be regarded as useful institutions guaranteeing law and order in a troubled world, but rather as the achievements of a lawless fellow who taught men to revolt against duly constituted authority. So Dr. Leupold comes to the conclusion, based on the history of Nimrod and Babylon, that empires are really very dangerous to the human race at the time they came into being. Well, besides being an opposition kingdom to the kingdom of God, Babylon has its roots and interest in the world as opposed to the realm of spirituality. So the nature of this kingdom is to teach men to revolt against God's authority over their lives. This is certainly a trait of the Babylon being revealed to us in Revelation chapter 14. That introduces us to Babylon, to Babel. The next appearance of Babel in Scriptures is Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. The event described in these verses takes place approximately 100 years after the flood of Noah. Remember the ark? Remember the rain? The animals on the ark? How many people were saved in the ark of Noah? Eight people, okay? So the event described in Genesis 11 takes place about 100 years after the flood. This city of Babel was founded in the land of Shinar, which was a fertile area of land between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. At this time, the whole human family was a relatively small tribe living in this area after having migrated from the region of Mount Ararat after the flood. And if you would look at a map and look at the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, right there where they kind of meet is where the city of Babylon was founded. And if you go straight north, you come up to the mountains. That's Mount Ararat, where the ark landed after the flood. So after the flood, they migrated gradually down towards what became Babylon. One would think that in such a short time after the flood, the human race would still be highly conscious of their responsibility and accountability to God, and the thought of rebellion would have been far from their minds. However, this just is not the case. The text presents a picture of a city council meeting in which the people are discussing a building project. Now, it was probably obvious to the people that they would have to build a city. Makes sense. People live together, they have to have a city. But it appears as if the tower, remember the Tower of Babel, was introduced into the plan almost as an afterthought, so the people would not be aware of the planners intending to include it in the original plan. Then, speaking to them as if the people had all the time been wanting the tower along with the city, the planners justified the need for this tower for two reasons. They say, to make us a name, reason number one, and two, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. You may not recognize that as a statement of rebellion against God, but it is. This scattering abroad over the face of the whole earth mentioned in verse 4 is the very reason they wanted to build this tower in Babel. This tower was built in defiance of God. You see, after the flood, God told Noah and his sons to replenish the earth. This, of necessity, involved people spreading abroad and away from the city of Babel. However, the Babylonian builders constructed this tower, whose top may reach to heaven, as a religious emblem and the means by which to unite the people and to keep them from leaving Babel. So this was rebellion against God. God told them to scatter, replenish the earth. But the Babylonians said, no, let's not obey God doing that. Let's keep you here. Nimrod saying, let's enlarge my kingdom. The more people I have, the more wealth I have, the more I have. So, the building of the tower was not an attempt to dethrone God. Rather, it was an act of defiance against God's authority. Now, you're starting to get an idea of the nature of the Babylon of Revelation, the 14th chapter here. Reliance against the authority of God. The spiritual Babylon of the Revelation does not try to do away with God, but instead it rebels against God's authority, saying that men have a right to make their own way to heaven. That was the idea behind the tower whose top may reach to heaven. Well, the Babylon of Revelation says men have a right to make their own way to heaven. Okay? The tower whose top may reach to heaven was a plausible substitute for obedience to God's command. And spiritual Babylon does exactly the same thing in modern times. The everlasting gospel that we studied last week teaches that people must be saved from all sin in order to walk with God. But spiritual Babylon's lords teach that God has made a way to heaven that does not require holiness in this life. In fact, they would teach people that you can't be holy in this life. The Tower of Babel became a rallying point for the people. if their consciences bothered them, they could simply remember that they were one people, citizens of Babel, with their own way to heaven, right in the middle of their city. And spiritual Babylon does the same thing. It soothes the consciences of its citizens in the same way. Remember, we are one people. We are, insert name of denomination of church. And we have our own way to heaven in our confession, in our particular creed, in our doctrinal statement, or in our confirmation. You see, there is great power in unity. It holds the masses without their raising questions, and it intimidates the few that believe the masses just might be wrong. Okay? Because of this united opposition to the rule of God in Babel, God moved to destroy this unity among the people of men by confounding the language. There they were, working on this tower. They all spoke one language. What language was that language? Anybody know? I have no idea what it was. But here they are up, can you imagine? They're up, 150 feet up off the ground, and, a guy says, hand me a brick. And the guy looking at him says, Rishnaktivik. To what? I said, hand me a brick. Navashtablik. And so this guy said, Navashtablik, and the other guy says, Gozoma Degviga. Now what I've said is just confusion. I just made up words. But that's what it sounded like. Here are all these people building this tower, and all of a sudden they can't understand each other. They go down and, they run around town and, they finally find somebody. Oh, well, I can understand you. Let's stick together. And we don't understand them, and they sound weird. And, can you imagine the panic experienced by the people in Babel when God confounded their language? Well, God in His infinite wisdom saw that it was best not to let mankind remain united in rebellion against His will. If they did, God knew that conditions soon would have deteriorated to those that existed before the flood. So confounding the languages was God's act to keep that from happening. It was the mercy of God. Well, by confounding the languages, you see, God made it impossible for men to unite against His will. Yes, one thing the human race has in common is its rebellion against God. But this rebellion is not a united rebellion. Today, there are many religions, each claiming to be the way to God. But these are different ways, and these ways are intolerant of each other. While the confounding of languages appears to be God's judgment, it is also an act of His mercy. The reason it was merciful is that it allowed man to be redeemable. With the confounding of language, there can be no one leader or no one man-made religion that can unite the human family in rebellion against God. They remain divided. There can be no common religion to keep the human family apart from God. And because of this, today, there are countless systems of religion on the face of the earth. So this profusion of religions actually makes true religion more obvious. Why? True religion stands out from the rest of the religions. And people that genuinely want to worship the one true God are easily drawn to it once they have seen it. So what people need to see and hear is true religion. They need to hear the everlasting gospel of that first angel. So from this episode in history of literal Babylon, it is seen that spiritual Babylon Babylon also contains the concept of confusion of doctrines, or what might be called many different religious languages that divide the religious world and keeps it from uniting people against God in one common doctrine. This confusion of teachings drives honest people to seek the truth. And there is one more element to consider in the history of ancient Babylon that helps to understand the spiritual Babylon. In 975 BC, the kingdom of Israel divided into two separate kingdoms. The northern kingdom, called Israel, which included 10 tribes of Israel, and the southern kingdom, called Judah, which contained only the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. The northern kingdom, Israel, fell to the Assyrians in 721 BC, and then the southern kingdom, Judah, fell to Babylon in 588 BC. The northern kingdom was apostate from its beginning, and it never experienced revival. Judah, on the other hand, had several periods of apostasy and revival, and toward its end, Judah as a whole was apostate, even though there were times when there were good kings sitting on the throne. Hezekiah was the last of the good kings of Judah, but even under his reign, there was not much hope for the survival of Judah. Under apostate conditions, you see, even good people lose their bearings and they permit things into their lives of which God would never approve. In the days of Hezekiah, God declared that the cumulative sins of the people had earned them his severe judgment. So God sent Isaiah to Hezekiah with a message found in 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 17. Isaiah says to Hezekiah, "Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and what your fathers have accumulated until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord." Wow. Who wants to hear something like that? But that was God's message to Hezekiah. So in this context, Babylon also represents the judgment of God on those that apostatize from true religion. After centuries, the Israelites had repeatedly apostatized, and their religion became nothing more than a formality to be observed or to be disregarded as one wished. Well, surely there were devoted and very sincere believers among the Israelites, but there were also agnostics and atheists. They were people that were mildly religious but not committed to God. And there were also sectarians who espoused modes of worship ranging from very liberal to very legalistic. Even their own king, a very good and religious king, lacked a sense of seriousness about his relationship with God as well as the relationship of his nation to God. So he struck up a relationship with the ungodly Babylonians. That's how far gone he was in that sense. And to God, this was the last straw. God sent his prophet to deliver a message of judgment. God used pagan Babylon to defeat apostate Judah and to carry them off into captivity. So the Babylonian captivity was actually an act of God's judgment. And while God's judgment was heavy, it was not intended to be permanent. The prophet Jeremiah received a message from God that the captivity would last for just 70 years. And history tells us that it lasted 70 years just to the day. So the second angel of Revelation 14 brings a message about a spiritual Babylon that had never before been heard by the Christian church. Multitudes of God's people divided among the various denominations and churches are now made aware of this Babylon condition. They are told that Babylon indeed is fallen. The power of the everlasting gospel, as taught by the first angel, was opening their spiritual eyes and giving them a spiritual hungering for a deeper and more meaningful comprehension of the truth of the real gospel. It was one thing to be religious. It is another thing to be made holy and truly be a member of the body of Christ. The traits of spiritual Babylon are inherited from its prototype emperor, Nimrod. Babylon, spiritual Babylon, has its roots in the world and actually opposes God. It is a view of religion that holds people in disobedience and opposition to God while making them believe they are serving God. Babylon uses the belief that each person can choose his own way to God as a chain to hold people in its bondage. Contrary to the beliefs of spiritual Babylon, it is possible to be part of the church built by Jesus Christ, both spiritually and materially. Modern Babylon says that's not possible. Well, this second angel reveals spiritual Babylon to us. While many of God's people are tied up in this spiritual Babylon, the Lamb on Mount Zion still wants his angels to preach that Babylon is fallen and to call out all those who will come and follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Amen. You have to come back next time because it says Babylon is fallen, and we're going to find out what that means.